Joining us now, Corey Lewndowski, New York Times bestseller, 2 books, Let Trump Be Trump, Trump's Enemies. Also is a senior advisor to Trump-Pence re-elect 2020. Hey, Corey, great to have you with us.
Good morning, John. Great to be back.
Let's talk a little bit about Joe Biden. May we? Because, through all this, Corey, we still have kind of an election to do and a president-elect, and the Democrats have to get a nominee. Got a couple of cuts here that I want to get your opinion to, if I may. Let's start with Joe Biden. Cut 10 here, Kara. Here's Joe Biden, Corey, saying, hey, the November election can't be postponed, but then he says Wisconsin should be postponed. Joe Biden, cut 10.
No, it shouldn't creep into your mind. Look, we've been through hell before. We had an election in the middle of the Civil War. We had an election in the middle of a pandemic, flu back in the turn of the century. We've had an election at every major crisis. We can take care of our health and our democracy. The idea of postponing an election is not possible. It should not happen. The democracy has to continue to function. We have to lead.
Do you think you won in Wisconsin tonight? Ordinarily, I'd be hitting you over the head with all these exit polls and crosstabs and things that I know about people all the way down to what they like for lunch. We're not going to have anything until Monday. What's your gut?
No, we're not. Well, my gut is that we shouldn't have had the election in the first place, the in-person election. It should have been all mail ballots in. It should have been moved in the way that 5 other states have done it. It's the idea didn't have enough poll workers in, over 100 and some polling places in Milwaukee. This was all.
Okay, Corey, so on one hand he says you have to have the election in November, and the other hand he says you shouldn't have it in Wisconsin. What is up with this guy?
John, we have seen Joe Biden speak out of both sides of his mouth on every issue for the last 50 years, and that's not an exaggeration. 50 years he's been stuck in Washington, D.C., and he has been the problem. He's the guy who votes for bills before he votes against them and, supports things before he opposes them. So this is no different. On its face, I don't disagree with Joe Biden in the sense of we need to move forward with the November election. The country needs to make sure that they have an opportunity to return Donald Trump and Mike Pence to the White House in November. I am, unwavering on that. But you can't have it both ways, Joe. You can't say let's move forward with an election where he's on the ballot, but let's not move forward in Wisconsin. And look, I think there are some real concerns about ballot integrity in states going forward. I think there's some real concerns about ballot harvesting going forward. I think there's some real concerns about the inability to control individual ballots once they've been mailed out, and know that particularly in nursing homes and elderly care centers, maybe one person is filling out more than one ballot. There's some real concern about that. But I do think this country needs to have an election in November and send Donald Trump and Mike Pence back to the White House.
Corey, we talked about this a little bit last week. The Trump-Pence campaign, your senior advisor, what are they doing now? How are they operating with the social distancing? They can't have rallies. You can't knock on doors. What is the modus operandi now?
Well, Joe, we continue to do outreach to our volunteers, to our friends, to our colleagues via phone, via all of the social media activities that we have, which include all of these things that nobody ever heard of before, all these new Fandango fancy apps that allow you and everyone else to communicate on your phone, on your telephone or on your computer. My kids, that's how they're doing their school learning. And what we've seen is because people are home, because they have more downtime, people have been much more engaged in contacting their neighbors, not just to check on them, to make sure that they're doing well, but to have a conversation about how Trump and Pence are handling this pandemic. So our numbers are actually higher right now in voter contact with potential interactions than they were if we were out knocking on doors. And that's simply because we're doing that from home, and our social media activity is much higher than it would be if we had individuals out knocking on doors. So we're continuing to pound that message and continuing to remind voters of the great job that Donald Trump and Mike Pence are doing.
Corey, are you confident that the Republicans are going to have a Republican convention in Charlotte at the end of August?
I don't know, John. I'm going to be the chairman, if we have one, of the New Hampshire delegation, as I was 4 years ago. Here in New Hampshire, we are just finalizing our electors. which are the individuals who will actually be voting after the November election for the winner of their state. So we're continuing to move forward in New Hampshire under the guise of we are all systems go, and we're not going to let anything stop us. Obviously, there's some health concerns about individuals attending large-scale rallies. I hope by August we're long past that.
Right.
We've seen the Democrats have now moved their convention. This is a call for Marshall Lee Kelly, Secret Service, healthcare professionals who are going to make those decisions. But here in New Hampshire, as we prepare for our delegates and our alternates, we are all systems go right now.
Well, we're the same thing here in Virginia, where I also hope to be our delegation chairman. I've already been elected as a Trump delegate to Charlotte. I hope we go forward with that. The Democrat convention moving from July to August, and now Biden's saying that it might have to be a virtual convention. How do you do that? I mean, how do you stop? What do you say to the Bernie people that, now you're going to, vote digitally? There's no interaction. How does that work?
Well, John, you know this. The Democrats right now are doing everything that they can to ensure that Joe Biden is the nominee, that there is no fight at the convention. Bernie's people have not given up. And, you've seen the stories leaking out where Bernie's campaign manager is encouraging him to leave the race and unite behind Joe. And Joe has decided to contact Bernie and tell him he's going to start vetting vice presidential candidates. The truth is, Joe Biden does not want to have a contested convention. And what we know, because so many states have postponed their elections until sometime, I believe, in June, that we may not know who the actual nominee is. Now, I believe it's going to be Joe Biden because he has such a large delegate lead right now. But we don't know what would take place on the floor of the convention should they still have it. And, John, your listeners must remember this. And he's a friend of mine, but less than 4 years ago, we had one of the delegates from Virginia who was actively trying to prevent Donald Trump, who had secured enough votes to be the Republican nominee, of becoming the Republican nominee because he was fighting for Ted Cruz to be that. Even though Donald Trump had secured enough votes under the RNC rules, there was still a procedure where they tried to flip states around from supporting Donald Trump. And so that could still happen, and that's why I think the Democrats don't want to have an in-person convention because they're afraid something like that could happen.
Well, Corey, you're so right. Great point. Of course, you're referring to the infamous former Attorney General of Virginia and losing candidate for governor in 2013, Ken Cuccinelli, who was a Cruz supporter, and he went to the convention with his team. Their goal was to what they called unbind the delegates, unbind states, and have an open convention. And they thought if they could do that, they could put Cruz over the top. So even though it appeared, I mean, we had to lead it. The thing was over going in there. They had their team together. I ran for delegation chairman of Virginia against him. He beat me by 2 votes. I tell you what, Corey, that was hand-to-hand combat. Look, he's in the administration. We're all friends now. We all made up. But that was hand-to-hand combat. And my job, as you know, at the convention was to shadow him. So I had to follow him so that he'd have a media interview with NBC, ABC, CBS, and then I would be behind him, and I would be offering the antidote or the alternative, if you will. It was a dreadful week I had dealing with this guy. But you're right. You don't know what's going to happen on the floor of this convention. And Corey, I know both of us believe that Joe Biden is going to be the nominee, but then you see him sometimes on these Facebook Lives or these videos in his basement, and he can't put 3 sentences together that make any sense. And so you say to yourself, okay, is he just not accustomed to that environment? What do you think that is?
Well, I think, and I'm not, a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I think he's lost something on the fastball. I think we've seen that. Joe Biden has been in office 36 years in the U.S. Senate, 8 years as the vice president. He's now been out of office for 4 years, and his entire career, has been in front of the public eye, and he just can't let it go. And I think, it's unfortunate because, John, the Democratic Party was supposed to be this party of the people, the party of diversity, the party of women, the party of African Americans, the party of everything that they pretend that they stand for, but they really don't. And instead, the two last people who the Democrats are looking to nominate are old white guys who have no energy. I guess Bernie has some energy, but old white guys who are throwbacks to the age of the dinosaur that don't represent supposedly the diversity that the Democrats are looking for. And there's no mainstream media opposition to this. So I think Joe has lost it. I don't think he's the same Joe Biden that he was when he went into the U.S. Senate 45 years ago, literally, right? And I think the truth is they have not run a modern campaign. They don't understand a modern campaign. They're running things the old way. And I think he's going to suffer the same fate as the Clinton campaign did, which is they're going to lose to Donald Trump because of not only the juggernaut that we have built as a campaign, but also our ability to communicate directly with American people through social media activities. And we are seeing, John, how all of a sudden those social mediums don't want to take political advertising in this election cycle, right? That is a direct affront at Donald Trump and the Trump campaign and the work that we've been doing. And 4 years ago, we revolutionized the way that political campaigns were run, and I was part of that process, as was Brad Parscale, Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, Dave Bossie. A lot of people were, and we got no credit for it. When Barack Obama did it, they wrote the book Inside the Cave, the massive data operation. Donald Trump does it 10 times better, and they say that it was because of the Russians that we won the election. So, Joe Biden's campaign is in big trouble. They haven't raised any money because if they did, they would have put out how much money they raised last month. We have a juggernaut of a team. We've got a great team in place, and we are ready to take on Joe Biden if he is actually the nominee after their convention.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. We're with Corey Lewndowski, former campaign manager for the Trump for President campaign, New York Times bestseller, 2 books. Get them on Amazon, Let Trump Be Trump and Trump's Enemies. Corey also now senior advisor to Trump Pence 2020 reelection campaign. Corey, a lot of us saying that the president has got to take the economic calamity numbers into consideration as he makes a decision at the end of April on whether or not to get production back and open up the economy. I'm going to play a quick clip here, Corey, to get your take. Here's President Trump, cut 13. He said, I'd love to reopen the country with a bang, cut 13.
Well, I'd love to open with a big bang, one beautiful country, and just open. But it's very possible, there are some areas that are not affected very much, and there are other areas like New York and New Jersey that have a tremendous impact. Louisiana, great state, and it's incredible. They came in late because, they were doing great, and then all of a sudden it just sprung up. You look at parts of Michigan, Detroit has been hit very hard. So there are some places that are hit very hard, and other places have not been hit very hard, frankly. I mean, by comparison, very little. So we're looking at 2 concepts. We're looking at the concept where you open up sections, and we're also looking at the concept where you open up everything. I think New York is getting ready, if not already, but getting ready to peak. And once it peaks, it'll start coming down, and then it's going to come down fast. We're way under any polls or any of the models, as they call them. They have models, and we're way under, and we hope to keep it that way in terms of death.
We get this thing reopened by May 1.
John, it's so important. And what the president is talking about here, and you look at those states, particularly in the western part of the country, that have large land areas, small populations, and are not seeing a number of COVID-19 cases, you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. I think in the state of Wyoming, they've got, whatever it is, 100 counties or whatever they have in Wyoming. And of those 100 counties, there's like 6 or 7 total counties that have cases. And so to close the whole state in North Dakota, South Dakota, parts, Iowa, Nebraska, these governors have looked at this and said it doesn't make economic sense because, number one, our population is very spread out. We've got a lot of area. Number two, we've got no cases. And number three, closing our state in totality is not only detrimental to our long-term well-being, but doesn't signify the need to do so because we don't have these cases. So
right.
I stand with these governors who are fighting to make sure that their economies can continue to try and receive some revenues. And look, it's different in New York. It's different in New Jersey. There's no question about it. Even in my home state of New Hampshire, we have no cases in the northernmost state called Coos County, in the northernmost county called Coos County. We have, of the 10 counties in New Hampshire, there are no known cases of COVID-19 up there. Again, it's a sparse population. And so you have to allow local elected officials to make the decisions. But the truth is, we cannot continue to keep our country closed for another 6 or 8 weeks and think we're going to have a recovery. We've seen 10 million jobs lost in 2 weeks. The new numbers are going to come out. We've seen the unemployment rate tick up to 4.5%, which is still phenomenal. But come May 8th, when the new unemployment numbers come out, we could be sitting at 6 or 7 or 8%. And it's for companies, John, it's much easier to lay people off in mass than it is to hire them in mass. And so even when we reopen, it's going to take some time.
Oh, it's going to take them a long time. And coming from a business owner, the two of us own businesses, it's very difficult to lay people off for, a period of time. And then just one day you hit a switch, you bring them back. You don't have the demand. You don't have the customers. You don't have the revenue. You don't have the clients. You don't have the work to do, right? Depending on what business you're in. I got a friend of mine that owns a hair salon who told me, Guy, and he's, worked at it forever. He's got a great clientele. Now he's going to individual houses cutting hair. And he's like, look, I got eight barbers, salon people, hairstylists that work for me, during this time that nobody's working. I mean, they're finding other people to cut their hair to come into their home or whatever. It's unrealistic to think I'm going to open up on June the 10th and have the same volume of business I had when I close in the middle of March, right? It's not going to happen. That's going to take me 15, 18 months. Meantime, I can't bring all 8 of them back. I might bring 3 of them back until we build up again. See, this is what people don't understand, how small business is. It's amazing, the fake news and the imbeciles that go to that press conference, Corey. I know you watch it every day, and they ask the same half-wit questions over and over again about why aren't you wearing a mask or whatever other nonsense, or why did you fire some inspector general? I mean, it's just maddening, isn't it?
John, it is maddening, and you're spot on about the small business impact. Look, I think the federal government has made some mistakes in this, and I'll be very clear about it. They said the loans were first come, first serve. That's a terrible thing to tell people because they go into panic mode and think if they don't file the paperwork right away, they're not going to have the opportunity to get the money. From what we're hearing and from what I believe Mitch McConnell has said is there's going to be an additional opportunity for small businesses to receive some more funding because the Congress is going to continue to fund the Small Business Administration to help take care of these. This is going to be separate than another large-scale appropriations bill, which is going to come down the pipe probably sometime in May. But small businesses right now are being penalized because the large lending institutions didn't have clear guidance, and those small business owners, John, of which I am one and you are one, have feel immediate pressure to go and file your paperwork as fast as possible because they're afraid the money's going to run out. I can tell you this. This president understands what it's like to run a business. He's the only president in a long, long time that was signing the front of paychecks and not just the back of paychecks. Mm-hmm. So he gets it. And look, his businesses, I am sure, have been impacted like everybody else's. And he's not making decisions for him. But what he does is he understands when business decisions are made, how that impacts everybody's lives. And so he wants to make sure small business owners are having access to capital, that these banks, these large lending institutions, are not taking advantage of people. And we have to make sure that people have access to that capital. And if that means paying people, keeping them on payroll through help from the federal government, then that's important. But we also have to start to come back and people start traveling on airplanes again. It's not just a switch that you turn on. Like you said, it's going to take months and months and months to recoup the lost revenue that these small businesses are going to have. And that is, you couple that with the investments that they're not making right now, and that's the economic calamity that we're facing.
Corey, you're spot on and so right, and I think the president does understand this. And, what I've been saying here for a couple of weeks is the economic impact of shutting down production and closing the economy and what that causes, those numbers should be measured, and they should be side by side the numbers of the virus so people can see them, right? This is how many suicides. This is how many people are now drug addicted, on alcohol, everything else, family splitting up, domestic violence. All these figures should be laid out there so we can all make an informed decision, Corey Lewndowski, on how to go forward. Final question. In my family, if somebody got ill with a virus and our doctor suggested they take the anti-malaria drug combined with the CPAC to treat the symptoms, I would sign off on it based on what I've seen and heard. What about you?
You know, John, I've got 4 children that we have to, take care of their health issues if they ever have any, because that's the job of a parent, right? My kids are too young to make those decisions. But God forbid they came down with a virus like COVID-19, and somebody said to me, here is a drug that is FDA approved, not approved for this particular issue, but approved, and it has shown very positive results. You bet your bottom dollar I would do everything humanly possible to make sure that my kids had access to the very, very best medicine available, even if it was not specifically designed to fight COVID-19. And let me tell you, John, I watched Peter Navarro 2 days ago on CNN where Berman sat there and attacked him for saying, you're not a doctor. How can you say what a doctor and their patient should have the opportunity to discuss? And Peter said, hey, I'm not saying that, but let me ask you a question, John Berman. If in New York City you come down, God forbid, with this virus, would you take that? And, of course, John wouldn't answer the question because it's the hypocrisy of the left all the time. Peter Navarro is a Ph.D. economist at Harvard. He can read what the studies say, and the studies indicate that this is a drug that shows some promise. Does it mean it's the end-all, be-all? Of course not. But we've got 29 million doses sitting in a storage facility somewhere that we should be dispersing, and it has shown promise. And so, the left, the CNNs of the world attacked Peter Navarro for making that recommendation against Dr. Fauci's recommendation. And what Peter said was, hey, let's just disperse these to the hot zone so that people want the opportunity and they have the conversation with their physician. They should have access to it. And so, I thought Peter, just to give him a plug, did a phenomenal job during that interview with CNN a couple days ago. And the host of CNN in the morning, John Berman, just could not answer if he was diagnosed, if he would be taking it, because he knows the hypocrisy is. His answer would have been yes, like probably every other American, because they want to have access to the best health care.
We're almost out of time, but I got to ask this final question. So the left and the fake news media that are attacking the utilization of this drug, although we've got doctors saying that they've had some saying they've had 100% success with it, why wouldn't they be cheering it on?
John, I don't know the answer. And look, I understand I'm not a clinician, and I don't participate in double-blind studies and all those things. But we're at a precipice right now. We're at a place where we see a drug that's traditionally used for malaria that's showing positive indications that it's helping people cope with COVID-19. Let's let the doctor and the patient make the decision if they want to have that treatment together. But let's make sure that the treatment is available as opposed to just not making that accessible to people. And I don't understand, because I think everybody wants people to be better. I think everybody wants this pandemic to go away. I don't understand why there's a fight over a doctor having the opportunity to potentially prescribe it to a patient if they thought it was in their best interest.
Doesn't make any sense to me either. Corey Lewndowski, I want to thank you for your time being with us today. Thank you